the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site, with my co-host, Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com and the SB Nation NFL site for the Arizona Cardinals, and also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. This is episode 377, and this is the short week. So we are talking about a game that happened over the weekend and previewing a game that will, by the time this episode actually goes live, will be about a day. So about 24 to 36 hours after if the show is available, the Cardinals will be playing again as we have the Thursday night matchup with the return of DeAndre Hopkins and taking on the New Orleans Saints, a team that is kind of in the same boat as the Cardinals that just look better in terms of how they're doing. But the Cardinals are coming off a terrible loss. We sound like morons now as we were talking about the Cardinals getting right. How many games in the next 5 could they win? Could they win all 5? No, they couldn't even win the first one, where they lose 19-9 to the Seattle Seahawks. Defensively, they do a decent job, but they managed to score. Hey, they scored in the first quarter. They scored on their first drive, and then their offense never scored again. They didn't score a touchdown. They passed. They were terrible on third down. It was seemingly nothing was going right offensively. And let's start with that. What happened? What happened in that game? Because as you're watching it, you feel if they go down the field and they get that first field goal, you're like, all right, this is on track, right? And then nothing. What was the issue? Because offensively, they look as lost. Honestly, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's 2018, but it's getting close to that.
Yeah, and what you look at right now is just a quarterback that this week was really, really out of sync and didn't play well. And, it's unfortunate because in other games he's played well and hasn't gotten support. We talked about the drops in the Eagles game, right? And then this week he kind of was the reason. Kyler Murray missing some throws, missing some opportunities, and then as the game was going on, you could see him pressing, trying to make a play, and just trying to do too much, and that ended up hurting him, especially on the fumble. He started to try to take over in a different way, which is what we've asked him to do, obviously, as a fan base.
That fumble was so bad.
But, it's just one of those situations where sometimes it just doesn't work out. And Sunday was that day where they just, for whatever reason, he could not get on track. And obviously as he goes, the team goes.
Yeah, he was sacked 6 times. He turned the ball over twice. He threw this interception at the very end of the game. He had that bad fumble, like he had just run for 15 yards and got a first down and got him in position. And it felt at that point like, okay, they're threatening. He made a play, and you're like, okay, that'll just jump spark. And then he gets the ball popped out, and they turned the ball over, and that was basically it. Offensively, it was just a struggle.
It was, and one of the things that we've seen is that right now, just as a team, they lack that big play at a big moment.
Yeah.
He missed that throw to Zach Ertz where he's missed a throw to Zach Ertz the last 2 weeks. And then he missed a throw to Hollywood. He missed a throw.
The timing is just he's been throwing behind people. That third down throw to Rondale Moore. Well, was it the fourth down throw to Rondale Moore that he skipped?
Yeah, but you go back to that too, and then there's the flip side where the third down throw where he hits Moore in the hands and Moore drops the ball. And that was one of those plays where you go back and you look at it and you're like, holy cow, he literally has a mile of open real estate on the side, and they needed 3 yards. And if Moore just catches the ball, he's running. And that's the thing, is like, we talked about it the week before. And I know both of us are to the point that we're not going to say they're a bad team yet, but it's getting closer to that.
Yeah,
and that's what
we didn't believe they were a bad team early on. That's where he's like, well, they're just not playing well. This is not a bad team. They look like a bad team, right? Well, at least if offensively, they look like a bad team, and that's a problem because that's supposed to be their strength.
Well, and that's what I mean, and that's just what it is, man. Like, at the end of the day, if you don't make those plays, you're a bad team. And like you said, right now, they're just not making those plays.
They're not getting enough from many people. I don't know what it is this year. Maybe it is the lack of Hopkins in the building, him pushing forward. I don't know what it is, but we'll see if things change. But people are talking about, like, they're missing. I will say this: they keep missing guys that they need, and they keep Kevin Hayes half-hearted. When you're relying on Sean Harlow as your starter, I will say Sean Harlow playing next to Justin Pugh played very well against Philadelphia. They had a good plan for that. But then when you have Harlow starting a second game in a row, and then Pugh gets hurt, and so you're playing, Max Garcia for 3/4 of the game, who is a year older, was not 100%. He's been dealing with the toe injury, and when Garcia got in the game, it was bad. The interior was bad. There was pressure. There was no running room. It was a bummer because, you like to see how Eno Benjamin runs with the ball, like his approach, but they got nothing out of the run game other than Kyler. And then they got away from the run. They stopped running the ball, and then nothing was happening in the pass game as well. Interesting that Greg Dortch's, now I get why, because Rondale Moore basically plays his position, but the guy that seemed to be the spark is not getting any playing time.
Yeah, and Dortch was doing that, right? And now it's weird because, like, one of the things we've talked about that's like happening consistently is that they're putting a guy in Trey McBride, who we've all clamored for, and he's consistently making mistakes in big situations. And that's not to say that other guys aren't making mistakes. I mean, literally, we just talked about Kyler, missing throws the last 2 games, but like, it becomes magnified when you're not playing a ton. And then, like, in those small reps, you're making a monumental mistake in every game.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what
he's had one or two of those in each game that's been a glaring mistake.
Right. And, this last week, he had the false start on 3rd and 1. So instead of 3rd and 1, it's 3rd and 6. And like you said, that I believe that was the one that he skipped to Rondale Moore. It's just situations, man. Like, you hope that it's something that they can overcome, that it's a lull in these 6 games. But, at the same time, it's one of those situations where you've got guys that are very antsy and nervous because this has been now, a half a season of this from last year, and now 6 games into this year.
Absolutely. I will say there were definite positives to the game. The defense as bad as the Seahawks defense had been so far this season, their offense had been impressive. And the Cardinals, let's be honest, the Cardinals shut down their offense. They did not, Ken Walker got free a couple of times. He ended with 97 yards, and that included, a 20-something, a 30-something, and a 17-yard run. And it basically came down to 2 or 3 plays, but defensively, they played as good as you could expect, and there are some increased positives. Is that the pass rush is finally kind of breaking through. They had only 2 sacks in their first 3 games. Then they had 2 sacks each of the next 2 games. They had 5 sacks on Sunday. Not one came from Zach Allen or J.J. Watt, so that's promising. And we had lots of, all 5 of them came on third down, so they were timely sacks, which you love to see that, because a sack on third down ends the possession, essentially. You got Cameron Thomas picking up his first career sack. Myjai Sanders got his first career sack and almost had another one. Marcus Golden looked active. Like he was doing things. He picked up his first sack of the year. Zaven Collins even had 2 sacks, the first 2 sacks of his career. And so you were getting, and J.J. Watt was playing well, Zach Allen was playing well, and so you look at that front and you saw some life. Analytically, their pass rush had been winning, but they weren't finishing. And over the last 3 weeks, they have been finishing. They now have 9 sacks in 3 games after only having 2 in 3 games. And so that is a positive. What we're not seeing yet defensively is them taking the ball away. And that's the one thing that's missing. They've gotten better on third down. They've gotten better in the red zone. They just need to take the ball away now to go from a solid defense to a very good defense.
Yeah, and that's kind of the next step. And you have to like the fact, like you said, that they're making plays in timely situations and getting stops in timely situations. But the reality is that they're also gassed. Like I tweeted about it during the game on that drive after, they get the stop and the touchdown on the punt, and then Seattle comes out and just goes down the field, right? And scores a touchdown. It's like there also becomes a reality that, one, they're gassed, but 2, can you stack stops? You know what I'm saying? Like, we talked about it the week before. Like, your offense, who's been struggling, ties it up, and then you let up a 17-play, 9-minute drive. Yeah. And it's like, and then the same thing. So you and your special teams make this huge play, right? And you create this momentum, and then the next drive you give up a touchdown, and now it's instead of 3, it's back to 10. And you're like, oh crap, right? Like that's almost the next step. Like, obviously, like you said, their defense is leaving or giving them a chance to win games. And that's all you can ask for. But if you look around the LA Chargers game on Monday Night Football, awful offensive football. I mean, Justin Herbert threw 57 times and had a 4.1 yard per attempt average. And they won the football game. That's because Russell Wilson was, I think, 5 for 20 after halftime. After going 10 for 10, after the first quarter, after going 10 for 10 in the first quarter. Like, that's just the reality of the situation, man. Like, and so you look at those defenses are making play after play, and then it's just one singular play that changes the outcome of the game. Whereas, and again, this is not on the defense, so I just want people to understand that. But if you're going to play it or still compete and be at that level, your defense has to back up a big play or a big situation. And that's where the Cardinals have failed defensively since the Kansas City game, I will say. Yeah. Like, they've not been able to sustain that success. And when they have, they've won. Look at the Raiders game, look at the Panthers game. They were able to sustain that success.
And you know why they were able to?
Because the offense
scored points.
Right. And the offense was staying on the field and moving the ball. And all of it's integrated, like all of it's together. But like I said, the Philly game is a much, much bigger issue than the Seattle game. Much bigger, because you literally were given the lead back and then they just pounded it down your throat, and like you almost had to tap out because you couldn't stop it. You're like, oh, stop, please, no more.
It was, yeah.
But yeah, so I mean that's what's going on is like, and again, I would say if you're gonna assign blame, I would say it's right now 75% offense. I would say it's 15% defense and 10% special teams. And who thought that would be what we were talking about in 2022?
Absolutely. Coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about Kliff Kingsbury. Whether is it time to make the seat hot, and should he give up play calling duties? That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. After Matt Rule was fired, now Kliff Kingsbury is now the betting favorite to be the next coach fired. And if you combine, if you look big picture, you see, okay, not bad. But then you look over the final half of last season and the first half of this season, and you have a team that is bad. And you have a team that doesn't, like, his forte is offense. It's got to be frustrating because he's literally never had a team any time in his coaching career that struggled offensively. You could probably say his rookie season in 2019. There's lots of reasons for that, but even that, there were flashes where you're like, oh, okay, this offense has something to it. But this, over the last 10, 12 games, it's been bleh. And people are starting to say, that people are already calling that, heck, beginning of this year, into last year, people wanted Kliff to be fired. Now they're already saying, hey, things don't turn around this week. They're like, fire him this week.
Yeah, the extension was a mistake. You got to get rid of him. And it's like, look, man, at the end of the day, and this is what I tell people, who's your solution? Like, there's twofold to it. Like you were talking about, the play calling stuff where people are like, he's got to give up play calling. Okay, let's just say they do. Who's calling plays?
Colt McCoy.
Yeah, right. Like, is Kyler calling his own? Like, that's the thing is, okay. And then two, and this is something that, we can get into at a later date, obviously, but like, you've got to have an option. And let's remember, the last coach before Kliff was Steve Wilkes, because that was the best they could do. The coach before that, the best they could do was Bruce Arians, and it just worked out. Like, right. It wasn't like that's who they wanted. Remember, Andy Reid.
Andy Reid was all but hired, right?
Right. They put all their eggs into the Andy Reid basket, and it didn't work out. And they then sat there and hired Bruce Arians at the last minute because he, remember, nobody wanted Arians, and he worked out, and so that's great. But literally nobody wanted Bruce Arians to be their head coach at the time. And so it was kind of a match made in heaven of like, I've got something to prove, and the Cardinals just needed somebody. And it was interesting because I think part of the reason why the teams weren't going to just be all gung-ho about Arians is because Arians wanted to bring in his guys. He didn't want to keep guys on staff that were already there. Oh yeah, that's the thing. And
the Cardinals, I will say that Steve Keim, brand new GM, that was one of the smartest things he ever did. Is he let a guy who'd been in the league forever, who already had a head coaching. He had a head coaching plan, so he already had on speed dial all his guys that he wanted to hire, and he let him do it, and it worked out.
Right? Do people not remember the outrage over getting rid of Ray Horton?
Yeah.
And so that's the thing. So on the flip side, and again, I don't want this to become I'm having to defend Kliff, because I think Kliff's had his faults this year, and I think he's struggled at times as well. Kliff doesn't have say in much of the coaching staff. And if you guys follow along, the reason why this job can not look so desirable to a lot of outsiders,
Keim has the control. Keim
right.
has the roster decisions. I think the coaching decisions were in tandem, but yeah, they were definitely influenced by Keim.
We know that the two biggest ones, Vance and Sean Kugler, were Keim hires,
mm-hmm.
and so like that's the thing. So you have to look at that situation and say, what is that something a coach would want to come into? And that has to be a realistic look. And so if you say, why don't they just go hire, like the one I got all the time, and it kind of just made me laugh and chuckle, but people are like, why don't they go get Brian Daboll? Okay. So even if they fired Kliff, all right, after the season, after the drop off and everything else like that.
If they'd have fired him last year, yeah.
Yeah.
Daboll was always going to New York.
Right. He was going to New York.
They hired the Buffalo GM dude.
Yeah.
that was always it took a long time to happen, but we all know once they hired their GM, Daboll's going there.
Right. And then, people will be like, well, what about Mike McDaniel? Well, I mean, since Mike McDaniel lost his quarterback, they've lost 2 straight games, right? Like every shine comes off a little bit, and remember last year, the flavor of the month was Brandon Staley, right? Oh my gosh, Brandon Staley's.
And he looks so bad this year. And who's the Zach Taylor, the Bengals guy? They made it to a Super Bowl, and Bengals fans are calling for his job. Like all of this, like this is not like, trust me, we can have the conversation about Kliff. I'm fine with that. It's gonna have to happen after the season's over and all of that stuff. Like Jess and I are open to the conversation. If things continue in this trend. The reality is, though, this isn't just an Arizona thing this year. There's been a lot of bad football this year, bad offensive
played.
Football, and part of that is the league. It happens like that. It goes in ebbs and flows. Once you see offenses that are taking off, defenses adjust. This year we're seeing defenses taking away the big play and say, okay, dink dunk, dink dunk, dink dunk, and you literally have to, or you turn the ball over.
Well, and the thing is, you look at it, who do you like? If you fire, Kliff, whatever, and let's say that Nathaniel Hackett gets fired in Denver as well. Like, okay, well, where are you going? Like, are you coming to a franchise that unfortunately doesn't have a historically great,
ultimately it comes down to what they believe in what that guy believed in Kyler Murray.
Right, Kyler versus Russell Wilson.
And at least right now that looks like a toss-up.
Right, exactly. And so that's the thing.
Russ has looked so bad this year.
Well, I mean, he looked great in that first quarter, and everybody's like, he's back, here it comes. And then you watch the rest of the game, you're like, this is literally the worst offense I've seen in the NFL. Like, so so that's the thing, is like the hot seat. I mean, the rest of the season's a hot seat.
Yeah.
Right? Like the reality is, if they don't perform, if they don't win 7+ games this year, I'm not going to say they're going to fire him, because that's a lot of money that they'll have to eat and everything.
That's the thing. For me, when you gave them 5-year extensions.
What was were they not allowed to have a bad season?
So, going back to Steve Wilkes, I was always under the impression, like, yeah, but you've got to let coaches work through things. So Kliff had his build up, but then there was a drop up. How does he respond? They did that for Keim. They did that for Keim after 2018, and they let him rebuild. Now the problem is fans are going to get apathetic. That's just the fans are already apathetic. But
here's my thing, like, and you're right, they are. But like, remember, San Francisco gave Kyle Shanahan 2017 where they went 6-10, and 2018 where they went 4-12. And then they came back and went 13-3, and then the next year they went 6-10.
Yeah,
they made the Super Bowl, and then the next year they went 6-10, and then the next year they're in the NFC Championship game. So like, that's the thing, is like Jess said, there's ebbs and flows. Like, there are very few franchises that you can point to that are similar to the Patriots, right? Or even the Steelers.
The Steelers, like, well, Tomlin this year probably might end up being the first year he's ever had a losing season. I think it comes down to this: is they are terrible right now. It's one thing, like, you look at Shanahan's issues, like when they've been bad, you can always point to things like major injuries to key players, to quarterback. I mean, I think like this year, whatever success they have, I myself have said, if Trey Lance is their starter, you can't believe in him much, because if you look at, before this season, Shanahan was 8-28 with anybody other than Jimmy Garoppolo starting. And they ended up not trading Garoppolo, and then Lance gets hurt, and so they have Garoppolo, and so you have a team that you believe is going to be pretty all right, because that's what Jimmy Garoppolo gives you as a quarterback play is pretty all right. You're going to see some high-end stuff, but he's going to disappoint you in the end because he has a ceiling. But you could point to the seasons that they were having and going, oh, this is why. I think you could point to last season, the last half of last season, and you can say, okay, yeah, that's why. The problem is this year, you're looking at it and you're going, well, why is it? You could say, DeAndre Hopkins was suspended, okay. The trades that they made, the guys got hurt, but they haven't had any like major injuries until now, Justin Pugh and Hollywood Brown. And the play's been bad. If things turn around, but if they look this bad the rest of the year, you really have to consider it, because it unless there is something you can point to for the terrible play, like starting guys like C.J. Beathard and and Nick Mullins, and so then you look at it, that's when you have to really think hard about moving on from them. Though I do believe you should, especially you committed that much money to Kyler, you committed 5 years to Kliff, you committed 5 years to Keim. You've got to see him get through it. And I know the fans aren't going to want to see that, but you've got to stand. You have to stand firm in saying to the fan base, we've seen what they've done and how they've improved. We don't know what happened this year. They have to work. We want to see them work through it.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is, like, you look at, and I know I'm throwing out coaches that are definitively better than Kliff right now, in Shanahan, and then John Harbaugh in Baltimore. But remember, in the Ravens won the Super Bowl in 2012. I mean 2013, but the 2012 season they won the Super Bowl.
That's been a long time.
They went 8-8 the next season. Then they were back, right, 10-6. After that, in 2015, they were 5-11. And then the next year, they only went back up to 8-8. And that's when people were like, oh, they got to fire Harbaugh. Now, they extended Harbaugh. But since the 5-11 season, had 8 seasons, they've only made the playoffs 3 times. So again, you have to look at the big picture. And you have to, as you said, like there are ebbs and flows of seasons. There are even seasons when you're like, you just don't have it. I mean, we can look at the LA Rams this year, right? Like they don't look like they have it this year. We talked about the other teams. And so if the Cardinals are playing this bad and they finish up, 3-14, okay, that's a different conversation. But like if they're 6-11 and you're really disappointed with their season, the knee-jerk reaction thing is like, yeah, fire them. But like the reality is that it's much easier to fire the guy and then bring in the next guy and just perpetuate the cycle of
right.
The Arizona Cardinals, let's be completely honest, than it is to be like, okay, this was an off season, let's give them next season, see how they rebound, how they build back, what do they look like. If you give 2 back-to-back seasons where you're questioning the work ethic, the effort, those type of things, all right, go ahead, fire. But like one season, and I get everybody wants to point, well, half of last year. Okay, I get it. I understand it. But like what Jess was just talking about, there were significant game-changing injuries last year. This year, until now, there haven't been those excuses. I know DeAndre Hopkins was out, but you sort of mitigated that with Marquise Brown, and he's played well. It's not like he hasn't played well or performed well. So the question becomes, what's the issue? And that's what you have to answer. And if you can't answer that, then that's where the concern comes in. But the seat is hot because if you don't start to perform, you deserve to be on the hot seat.
Yeah.
But that's why the seat is hot. The seat isn't hot as in like this guy needs to be fired. Like I said, they end up 3-14 or 4-13. All right, I'll listen to you. But like if they end up at, like I said, 6-11, I'm not going to just be like, fire this guy immediately, because guess what? I've seen a lot of 6-10, 5-11 Cardinals teams, and guess what happened the next year? Oh, they fired the coach, and then they were 6-10, 5-11 the next year. Like at some point,
it was the same record, only slightly more hopeful.
Right, exactly. It's like, yeah, this is the new and improved Cardinals under Dave McGinnis, and it's like, okay, this is the new and improved Cardinals under Dennis Green, right? And then like everybody, it's always the new and improved Cardinals, and it's like, but this is our 12th head coach in the last 14 seasons. It's like, come on, guys. Like I get it. It's super frustrating. It's not been great. So there are legitimate questions that need to be answered, but it's not just like, hey, get rid of them.
So then the other thing that comes up is giving up play calling duties. And he said, like, I'm open to anything. The problem is who calls them?
Right. Who ends up
who's the guy that's going to call plays? Because it's Kliff's system. They hired him, and I know Kyler Murray on Tuesday, he kind of scoffed at like really, guys, really. Of course, Kliff's going to say that. There's one thing that we really enjoy about Kliff is that he seems to be very self-aware and is comfortable enough. Now there are lots of answers that he doesn't give, but when he says, "Hey, if it'll like," he always frames it like this. If it'll help us win games, I'm all open to it. Kind of that's what Bruce Arians said years ago. He said, if someone can do it better than me, they can do it. That's kind of what he's saying.
Well, and to your point, like, I don't have any doubt that he's open to it. But like we said, like, what do you do? Is Spencer Whipple going to call the passing game? And Sean Kugler? Yeah, Sean Kugler is going to call the running game. And look, I don't want this to come off as me just being indignant about certain things, but like, did you guys see Sean Kugler's offense in college? Like trust me, Kugler's forgot more about football than I'll ever know, but like he just
wants to run the football.
Right, let's just be very patient with things and stuff. And that's the thing is, like, if they have an option or they say, hey, like, are you willing, and to Jess's point, like, so you're gonna have Spencer Whipple call Kliff Kingsbury's playbook? Like that's what you're going to do?
And one thing we haven't seen is like there's decision making, but then there's just the fact of the matter is, and this is the message clip. We're not executing the things that we're doing in practice that in practice we are executing. Because it would be one thing if they weren't working in practice, they'd change the game plan. But then on Sunday, these plays aren't being made. So there's mistakes being made. So it's hard. And I'll be the first thing, people say, oh, he needs a better play call. All plays work if the players do what they're supposed to do. Right?
Right.
If the players there are very few times if the plan is run up the middle on 4th and 2 and they're prepared for it, well, you might say that there needs to be a better call. But like if there's a play call that there's a design and it's not executed because somebody misses a block or because the pass was thrown inaccurately or there was a drop or someone ran the wrong route, that's not about the play call, right?
Yeah, or there's a penalty, or
that's not a bad play call. That's a bad execution of a play call. And Kliff only would have called that if he thought it would work because he's seen it work when they worked on it, right?
Right. And so that's what you have to look at. And it's been, it's just been unfortunate that it hasn't worked out. And, you continue to wait and see and hopefully it gets better. But right now it hasn't. And let's just say this, it's not unexpected that this is happening at this point.
Now, coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best our Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about the trade that hit on Monday, kind of a surprise. What do we think of it? The Robby Anderson trade. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best our Cardinals talk on the web. It was kind of a difficult thing. If you guys know, if you followed me, if you listened to the show for long enough, you know that while this is basically a full-time job, what we do with the podcast and then running our sites, that's not the only full-time job we have. My day job is teaching high school, which makes sometimes when there's news in the NFL, that's a bit inconvenient. Inconvenient would be the word for me as I'm giving my classes. And Robby Anderson is traded to the Cardinals. I was completely unprepared for that. I was prepared for the DeAndre Hopkins trade because I had heard that it was a possibility. Robby Anderson, I was not ready for because I was like, wait, what? And, so Robby Anderson, who got kicked off the sideline by Steve Wilks, so he's a Steve Wilks cast-off. He had 95 catches a couple years ago, over 1,000 yards, and people have loved, since his days with the Jets, he's been a player for probably, about 5 years now. When we're talking free agent targets and this, that Robby Anderson is a name that's been come up even for the Cardinals multiple times. But talent has seemed to outdo his production so far. He was unhappy in Carolina. Something was happening. He gets kicked off the sideline, and he was apparently going to get cut. Steve Wilks wasn't going to have any of that. And instead, the Cardinals acquire him on the heels of Marquise Brown injuring his foot. Initially, we thought it was going to be fine. Then it was going to be season-ending, and then it turns out to be likely about 6 weeks. But nonetheless, we go from excited about Hopkins in Hollywood to just Hopkins, and now we've got Hopkins, Rondale Moore and Robby Anderson. What do you think of Robby Anderson, the player, and how he could fit here in Arizona?
I mean, anybody that's listened to the show knows his name's come up quite a few times. Always been a Robby Anderson fan. The player, I mean, obviously he's had some headache issue for some teams over the last couple of years. But I mean, I don't want to make an excuse for a guy like the behavior on the sideline. And we know Wilks is a bit of a,
he wants things done a certain, it's pretty close to Mike Singletary, kind of.
Yeah. And we know he isn't great with, guys that are a little bit of divas. I mean, we know that. And so when you look at it, It was never going to work out. So he got into it with the wide receiver coach, right? And it spilled over, and Wilkes involved himself and kicked him off the sideline. Allegedly, and obviously we weren't there, allegedly the receiver coach asked Wilkes not to kick him off the sideline. Allegedly. I don't know if it happened or not. So, obviously it was a differing of opinions, and then it went too far, but the receivers coach felt like he handled it well enough, but Wilkes didn't, so whatever.
Well, and the report came out not long after this. He's been available for basically the last year and a half.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, after his 1,100-yard season in 2020, when he was with Carolina, it's been bad. Last season, he had 110 targets. I don't know if people know this. He had 110 targets. He had 53 catches, which usually like really good is like 70-ish% catch rate, targets to receptions.
That's a really bad catch rate.
Yeah, he's less than 50%. He's again less than 50% this year. He's played with bad quarterbacks. He's played for a bad head coach. I mean, let's just be honest. Matt Rule was a nightmare. And he let it show more than he obviously should have. Yeah. In 2020, when he was playing with Teddy Bridgewater, who's, one of the things about Teddy is he's always been an accurate quarterback. I mean, he's not a guy that's going to throw the ball down the field a lot, but he's a guy that completes passes. He had 1,100, just under 1,100 yards. And I mean, you look at that offense, yeah, they went 5-11 and they're 24th in points per game that year. But like you look at it, they were, 18th in passing yards, but they were 12th in net yards per attempt, which means that takes out like sack yards. And so they were, even though they threw for less than 4,000 yards, they were 12th in net yards per attempt because they didn't give up a lot of sacks and they were able to push the ball down the field. And that was because DJ Moore and Robby Anderson and Curtis Samuel were really a nice dynamic trio of young wide receivers. Anderson was 27, so he was the old vet at the time. And this was in 2020, this was a move that you and I really wanted to see the Cardinals make, was to bring in Robby Anderson this year. And unfortunately they didn't. You go back, we were thinking that maybe Anderson would have been, the big splash move they could make at wide receiver. Then obviously they
went for Hopkins, which is a bigger splash move.
Right.
Okay.
They blew our doors off and we were like, oh, we had no idea. Right. So it's okay, obviously, but Anderson would have been a nice fit. He's a tall guy, at 6'3", very tall and lean at 190.
He'll make a really, like, if he can get acclimated, won't he make a very nice Z opposite Hopkins, kind of what they wanted to get out of AJ Green, but haven't yet, and who runs better. He's got the length, and he runs better than Green.
Yeah, and I'm sure he's not as fast as he was when he was coming out. Obviously, these guys all slow down over time, except for Darrell Green, but you look at it, he was a 4.36 guy at his pro day. So, I mean, you're talking about 6'3", 190, and he's running a 4.36. Now, he's probably a 4.4, maybe a 4.45 type of guy now, which is still like 0.2 of a second faster than AJ Green. Green's a little bigger at 6'5" or 6'3", 2. I think they list him at 225 now. But like you said, same type of usage, those back shoulder throws, those one-on-ones, those quick slants. He could be a more dynamic version of that. The question just becomes, what is he going to give you from a mental standpoint? Like, is he going to buy in, and is he?
I'm not worried so much about that because I think part of the issue is when you have a carousel of meh quarterbacks.
Right.
And now you're coming to a guy who around the league, say what you about it the season he's having, people still believe in the talent of Kyler Murray. And so I think especially for the rest of this season, went to the Cardinals, and that's the other part of it is that, this really literally is a half-season rental. They have no obligation. There's no damage done financially if they move on from him after this season. And so I think this year he'll be locked in, and it'll just be a matter of how quickly Kliff will trust him to be on the field.
Yeah, and you're completely right. And that's what it'll come down to. And like, if you want to look at, Robby Anderson, and so here's the thing, his catch rate's always going to be a little lower because he is a deep ball guy, right? He's a 50-50 guy. We talked about the AJ Green usage, right? But you look at even this year in the first game where Carolina came out and played Cleveland tough. He had 5 receptions for 102 yards and a touchdown. That's over 20 yards per reception. That's a 62% catch rate. That's over 12 yards per target, which is like a just massive number. Because remember, yards per target is even in those 8 or those 3 additional targets where you had 0 yards, you're still getting yards in those non-target or in when you are catching the ball. And so like he showed that he's still an explosive player. And since then he has 104 yards in 5 games. Oof. He had 3 receptions for 26 yards against the Cardinals a couple weeks ago.
The Cardinals have been locking down everyone, but yeah.
But the craziest aspect of the whole situation is until the San Francisco game last week, he was still playing a huge amount of their snaps, like just a massive number of their snaps, like 100% in game 1, 93% in game 2, 84% in game 3, 96% in game 4.
This is Baker and Beckham, right?
Right.
Baker, Beckham was unhappy there. A lot of receivers were supposedly unhappy with Baker and how Mayfield and how he was doing things. Then you get a guy who makes plays down the field, and you have a guy in Baker who isn't targeting him enough, or just isn't having the time or getting the ball to him well enough to make plays. And that he is, if things aren't going well, he's going to make it known, especially if he's been there for a while and there's a lot of a lot of frustration. And so, yeah, he is, I think, a high reward with kind of low risk. And that's the other part of the equation is the cost, which is nothing in next year's draft. It's a 6th-round pick in 2024 and a 7th-round pick in 2025, which I think are, you all know my thought on day 3 picks. I was going to say,
is this they consulted you on this before?
Yes, please. Now, They didn't do and I think the reason why it is 2 picks over 2 years is because they didn't have the capital this year coming, because they don't know their comp picks. They traded a 7th, which could be a 6th, for Trayvon Mullen, and they traded their 5th-round pick this next year for Cody Ford, and so it cost them, I think, an extra pick because it was over 2 years. Nonetheless, these are picks that are coming in 2024 and 2025, and the perspective, and you're giving up all your draft picks. Why you could have just had them, you wouldn't have released. And here, hey, let's look over the last 10 years. How many 6th-round picks or 7th-round picks have done anything for the Cardinals? And we can point to about a half season of Andre Ellington. Okay, even if it's a season and a half, and he was all right. He was great for half a season, solid for a season and a half, and you've gotten a few games of Benjamin so far. But when it comes to 6th and 7th-round picks, they're meh, right? You can't expect them to do anything. It's just nice when you do. And so if you can get And they often get 6th and 7th round compensatory picks to replace them. And so, yeah. And I like it. I like the move. And he is under contract next year. He has a $3 million, though that year in his contract was never meant to happen, basically. It was meant to trigger renegotiations, but he's got a $3 million roster bonus due probably in March and $8.8 million in salary. So basically he's on the books for $12 million next year, but because the Cardinals traded for him, didn't give him that contract, they can cut, like, if it doesn't work out and it's just he's not worth the headache, they can cut ties with him in the offseason. It will cost them no cap. It just only costs them a couple of picks down the road for half a season, with the potential of, hey, if he's really good, you could keep him on that final year of the deal. Obviously, Hollywood's number, I think, goes up to, is it 11 or 13 million next year? And you're going to have to make a decision with both of those guys next year, whether you're going to make those two your cornerstones as Hopkins ages out, or what. I think the potential reward is definitely worth it. Especially, I mean, you got to get something. Rondell Moore, he's not there yet. AJ has given you nothing yet, and you don't want the offense to be all Hopkins again, like it was in the first half. Well, like it was in 2020. The beginning of 2021, things would look great, but then when you took him out of the equation, it was disastrous.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is like they're just looking to continue to stack talent, and it's been an unfortunate kind of cavalcade of events. And do you think they would have made this trade? I mean, because this came to fruition fairly quick. So do you think they were already in a conversation to make this trade?
I think this was because I think this is in response specifically to Hollywood.
But that's what I'm saying, is like, because it happened on Monday, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. That, I mean, 1,000% you could be
I
right.
think all it took was one phone call.
Right.
Hey, guys on the phone with the GM for Carolina say, so Hollywood's out. Robby, is he available? Yeah. Yes. What you got? Well, I don't have any picks this year, so how about a 6 next year in 2024? And you're like, throw in a 2025-7. Done. Maybe it was only that.
And you could be right. I'm just curious. Like, typically, like, trades don't come together to fruition that quickly.
Right, because even the Hollywood trade, it was about a week or so coming, and they just had to keep quiet. And so they had the Hollywood trade, they had it kind of worked out, and they were just waiting for the right scenario to come up.
So, yeah, so it's just interesting because you see it and you see how well Hollywood have played. So it's just unfortunate. I mean, that's the thing too, is like we always say he wasn't going to keep up the pace, right? And probably not with Hop coming back.
At least the volume, no.
Right. But maybe now he starts to make bigger plays, right? Like maybe more down the field. Like he wasn't going to finish with 121 receptions.
Probably. It would be great, but yeah.
But you look at it, I mean, he was on pace for 121 receptions and just under 1,400 yards and 8 touchdowns. Like that's a huge receiver year. And so it's just, yeah, like you said, it's unfortunate. And now the question becomes, can Robby, and DeAndre get on the same page quick enough for it to be an explosive combo? And I mean, let's be realistic. We're not expecting it this week.
No. And if Robby plays at all, it might be in the like Javon Wims role that he played for 5 snaps.
Yeah, like 5,
and I didn't even realize he played. That was the thing. I'm like, I look at the snap counts, like Javon Wims played. I didn't notice him on the field. Coming up next on the Rise Up Seahawks podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about DeAndre Hopkins for a little bit. He's back this week. How much will he help? That's coming next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. DeAndre Hopkins returns. It is finally here. He is finally here, and it's been a long time coming because he had missed the last half of last season basically with his knee injury. He comes back from the knee injury and then gets hit with the PED suspension. 6 games he's out. And I'll say this, it's kind of been interesting because remember when Patrick Peterson was suspended in 2020 or 2019, and it was, I don't know, because Hopkins has been in the building for a couple of weeks, and I don't know if Pat did that because it was like he's been training super hard. And cornerback and receiver are a completely different thing because a cornerback's got to be on every single play, especially in a situation where Pat's their main guy. So you have to be on top of things. It's going to take longer to be in football shaped at corner than at receiver because, one, a receiver, it's different assignments, different routes, and a cornerback doesn't know exactly what he's going to end up doing every single route. That said, we sort of suspected, we speculated in the last show that they were kind of it's kind of felt like they're holding back with their offense some until Hop gets back. And this year we were anticipating him moving around more. At least this week, I don't think we're going to see him in a lot of places. I think we're going to see him stuck at the X on that left side of the offense like we've done for the last 2 years. But how much do you think that impacts? Because when Hopkins was on the field last year, the offense looked great. When he wasn't on the field, he looked bad. They looked stuck and lost and like searching.
Yeah, they were lifeless, and that's what you hope, that this is just the kickstart that they need. And like I said, it's interesting because Hollywood's played so well that you're saying that, but you look at it, they've been kind of stagnated in the running game. They haven't gotten much outside of Hollywood and Ertz in the passing game, but they haven't been able to do stuff in the red zone, and that's been kind of a carryover, right?
Yeah.
That's been a carryover from DeAndre being out. So they've had a lot of guys making plays, just not for touchdowns. And so that's where I wonder if the pickup comes. Because, you look at the reality of this situation with DeAndre, they were one of the best offenses in the NFL. Without DeAndre, they haven't done a whole lot. But
very underwhelming.
But even this week, you look at it, they put up over 300 yards of total offense. They won the offensive yardage battle. They had the 2 turnovers, which kills you. The week before against Philadelphia, they won the offensive yardage battle, right? The week before that against Carolina, they won the offensive yardage battle. So against LA, they won the offensive yardage battle. Against LA, they've won the offensive yardage battle. So it's really they've been about average. They're 16, so they're literally average in offense. They're 22nd in points, and that's total points.
And that's issues in the red zone because they're hurting themselves, and either they're settling field goals or they're going for it because that's what offensive do, and they're failing.
Yeah, and so that's just, and that's the thing. You look at their score percentage, so their drives of offense that are ending in scores, they're literally 24th, which is
not where you want a team to be at, whose offense is that they loaded up the offense. Like, this is a team that the offense is supposed to be great, and it's not. And he's like, is Hopkins going to make it magically better? I don't know if it's magically better, but shouldn't it, after maybe the first quarter or so, or even the first half of this next game, look not lost? Because that's kind of it. It's been feeling lost. They like they're searching. They're not. I think Hopkins in the lineup with that dynamic play, and I will say this is kind of foreshadowing to the preview about the Saints game. A Saints team that will probably be without Marshawn Lattimore, and so you've got Bradley Roby, who will be assigned to him primarily, who is
old and slow.
Oh, and a much better slot corner than border corner.
Right. And so you look at it like it's something that we talked, but I mean, we talked about it last week too. Like Tariq Woolen was their guy, and there was no issues for Marquise. Like he was eating them up all day. They missed too many.
Yeah.
They missed too many throws. And so, it'll be interesting. Do we have anything on Gardeck yet?
Don't know.
Okay.
That's the one thing no one's asked about him yet. So that's the.
And then what about Jalen?
Jalen, he didn't miss any plays during the game, and he was upgraded today. So I'm guessing he's probably on track to play.
Okay. Because like you said, their injury list is like, and that's the thing. So you look at it with DeAndre back. Rondell's rounding into shape. Zach has been consistent. They need Eno to take. I mean, he had a couple really nice plays in the game, especially that early catch and move that he made. But as a runner, there were times where he was looking a little hesitant. And now again, that timing kind of coincided when Justin went out. And we know how much of a drop off there is from Justin to Max, and that's not a shot at Max, like whatever. But
Pugh's been he's a big loss. He really is.
It is, and so hopefully Cody Ford's. They activated him. By the time this is out, we'll probably know if he's playing or not.
Yeah.
But they activated him, and we're so I am interested if they would go to him on a short week, or if they look at what the Saints are dealing with and go, all right, it looks like we're basically both in the same boat.
New Orleans is a mess right now. But I will say this: DeAndre Hopkins' season debut each of the last 2 years have been great. His debut with the Cardinals in 2020, his week 1, 14 receptions was a career high, and then last year against Tennessee, 6 catches, 80 yards, 2 touchdowns. And so if Hopkins, the first 2 years with the Cardinals, his first game of the season has been special both times. And so, hey, let's welcome that. Let's count on a big Hopkins performance, a big impact Hopkins performance. Maybe it won't be 15 catches for 150 yards, but if he has 5 catches for 80 yards and a touchdown, hey, that's great.
Well, and I'm honestly willing to wager, knowing Hop, that he's looking to put up 1,000 yards this year.
Oh, I bet he is.
Because
I bet he is.
Here's one of the dirty secrets about the NFL in general, but a guy like Hop, and I don't mean this in a negative way, because there was another guy that used to play wide receiver here that was similar. They really do care about their stats.
They do.
And they care about
the legacy.
They care about their legacy within the game. And Hop is going to be on a mission with the fact that anybody would question whether he was doing it.
Oh, right. Yeah. So whether it was that's why he was performing. He knows that if his play drops off after coming back from the PED suspension, it will look highly suspect. But, Kliff said, we was asked if he's going to have a pitch count, a snap count, and Kliff said, well, DeAndre told me he's not. So,
yeah. Well, and that's the thing is Hop is a very aware dude, and you're talking about a guy that is, really on pace to be a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, and he's seen what the Cardinals have been doing offensively, and he knows what he can do. He knows he's great. I can guarantee you, he's saying, I can fix this.
Yeah,
I can fix this.
And that's the thing is he wants this to be something that people look back and they he is the guy that, everybody knows about is obviously Michael Jordan with, how feeling slighted by the smallest things. And we as Suns fans obviously remember the 93 finals when Charles won the MVP and Michael took it very personally and then averaged 45 points a game in the finals. Like,
that was absurd.
That's literally the type of guy Hop is too. Like, I know he's not been necessarily the Michael Jordan of the NFL, but it's a completely different game. But that's his mentality, and so I do think you're right that like we could potentially see something special starting immediately with him. And I'm not saying the Cardinals as a whole, although his presence and that performance would go a long way.
First play from scrimmage, wide receiver screen to Hop.
Yeah, right. Like just getting him the ball immediately and like being like, "Hey, you're back, bud.
Like, get your catch. Go do something. Shake some tackles." Yeah. I'm excited to see it on a Thursday night. That's a lot of energy, and he's a gamer. Like, for a guy who he does miss a lot of practice time because he takes care of his body. He is a player and that was the issue in Houston, is that Bill O'Brien wanted his stars to practice more, and he deals with a lot of little stuff. He's got something in his ankle that he's got to monitor so that it doesn't come loose. But yeah, I'm excited to see it. So let's move on to the actual game. Coming up next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's preview this Saints game, this Thursday night game, which they've been, as bad as the Thursday night games have been the past couple of weeks. Everyone's looking forward to this one to be sort of like the savior. I don't know if it will be, but we'll talk about that next. Coming up on the Rise of Sea Red podcast. We're back on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Thursday night, Saints, Cardinals. Cardinals will be wearing their black helmets again with their color rush uniforms. I think it will look rather, really, really good. Although, selfish media guy, I do love the color rush jerseys. I hate them from the press box because they are hard, because they don't have a hard white outline. The red lettering on the black jersey makes it hard to see who it is, but that's just picky. I love the way they look. I love it. That said, Cardinals-Saints, Thursday night football. Both teams are banged up to heck. So the Saints don't know. We don't know yet whether it's going to be Jameis Winston or Andy Dalton. Interesting fact, Andy Dalton has only beaten the Cardinals once in his career, and I believe it is the first start against them. I think he's 0-5 in his last starts against them. Then you've got Jameis Winston's 1-2 against the Cardinals. They are unlikely to play are Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry, but Chris Olave should be back. Their tight end Adam Troutman has been missing time. Andrew Speed hasn't practiced this week. Marshawn Lattimore doesn't look like he's going to play this week, their top corner. That said, this is a Saints team that has put up 26 or more in their last two games. And it's been heavily now. They kind of the key for them. They have to score 25 or more to win.
Well, and they've been doing it in interesting ways. I talked with Canal Street Chronicles, their managing editor Tina Howell, and her and I spoke the other night, and it was really interesting because when you look at their numbers, like you said, it's not pretty. I mean, it's very Cardinals-esque in a lot of ways, right? They're scoring a little bit more per game, but they're also giving up more points per game. They don't throw the ball particularly well.
That in part, when you're relying on Andy Dalton, you're limited. And Jameis has not been. Jameis has been much more, for his full career, Jameis, as opposed to what he was before he got hurt last year. The very efficient, protecting the football. He's been pick prone again this year.
Yeah, and you look at it. I mean, to your point, like they've played the same number of games. I didn't go into percentage of snaps yet, so to speak, but Jameis had 30 more pass attempts, which, I mean, that's 31 to be like exact, 31 more pass attempts. He has 20 more completions, which, okay, that's a lot, but not like a ton. He has almost 300 more passing yards. And that corresponds to the fact that, like Jess said, they're really beat up on the outside. Chris Olave is their leading receiver, but Michael Thomas has been dealing with foot injury. Jarvis Landry has been dealing with knee, is it? I don't remember. But, so they're, like Jess said, the question is, will they play? Ankle for Landry, excuse me. Like you said, they've had a lot of issues. They don't turn the ball over as much now, which, again, as just pointed out, not shocking when Jameis Winston has 5 interceptions to 4 touchdowns on the season. But Andy Dalton's only has 3 touchdowns, but he's only thrown 1 pick. They utilize Alvin Kamara a ton. I mean, there's no getting around it. Kamara on the season has 83 touches on the season and 437 yards from scrimmage. So he's averaging over 5 yards per touch. The interesting thing for Kamara is he's got all those yards, and Jess and I have as many touchdowns as him on the season. Which
sounds good, right?
Which is, terrifying if you're us coming into this game, because you're like, well, here it comes. But your boy, big fan of you're a big fan of his, I'm assuming. Taysom Hill is just, he's providing a spark that a lot of people made fun of, but the reality is he's giving them something, and when they need it the most. He's averaging 10.3 yards per rushing attempt. God. He has 5 rushing touchdowns on the season.
If you mock what they know, the fact that what I actually love about this is that they're not like, it's not Sean Payton going, he's a quarterback. They really lean into this, and he does so many things well. He's super impactful. He's doing this sort of thing that the Cardinals need somebody to do on their team.
Yeah, and that's what it came down to, like you said, is like he's making big plays and giving chances for his team to be successful, while other players are not. It'll be interesting. Like you said, Olave is their leading receiver. He's having a really nice season. I know that was
we were Chris Olave fans.
Yeah, and that was the Cardinals' target. I mean, let's be honest, that's who they wanted in the draft, and they had the Marquise Brown deal on the back burner because there was no idea where he was going to go, and he ends up going 11th overall. Now I'll tell you this: he's got, the last 2 weeks have been more what you expect. He's 467 and 454, but in week 2 against Tampa, he had 5 for 80. Now that was on 13 targets, so they try to get him the ball a lot. But the week after that against Carolina, in a loss, like, what is going on this season? 9 for 147. So like, he's he is a guy that can make plays and does so really efficiently because he only plays about 75% of the offensive snaps. He's not a guy like Marquise Brown that was playing 95% of the snaps and only coming out when they were going in certain packages. Instead, he's a guy that comes in and makes plays in 75% of the time. The other guy, that a long history, still just trucking along, not the player he once was, in New Orleans for so many years, but Mark Ingram, he's back. He's averaging only 4 yards a touch. So again, but he's still the big kind of grinded out guy to Kamara's slash and dash style. So it'll be interesting to see how that all works out. Because one of the things the Cardinals have done really well until this last week was really bottle up running games. I mean, Jalen Hurts got loose more than Miles Sanders. Kenneth Walker, he had some really nice big runs.
Cam Akers hurt them on a couple of plays, but they've been able to contain things. And the other thing about the Saints is that they allow a ton of points per game. They are 29th in points allowed, 26.3 per game. Although yardage wise, they're middle of the road. So they're kind of the opposite of what the Cardinals offensively, who move the ball really well and are terrible at finishing. The Saints are very average in yards, but give up points a lot. And if you look at kind of they gave up 32 to the Seahawks, 30 to the Bengals, and they won one of them, they lost one. They've given up 20 or more. The fewest points that they've allowed is 20, but they've allowed 26 or more 4 times this year. And so if you're kind of looking at these games, is that you look at their defense, and it, especially when you're missing Marshawn Lattimore. Now Lattimore, Bradley Roby is a very serviceable guy. I know coming out of college, we're a big Paul Adebo fan, and he's been solid so far in his career. But this is a game where you want the Cardinals to be able to move the ball, or at least score points. But I'm being a Thursday night game, 2 teams that are very banged up, a Cardinals team that defensively is being very solid, making things very difficult for opposing offenses. I think we're going to have it's not going to be a shootout, I don't think. I think it will be a grinded out type game as the Cardinals kind of find themselves.
I'm hoping that they're able to. Like, that's my biggest thing.
Right.
Like you said, if Lattimore and Adebo are both out, Adebo's been really, really solid this season. That's 2 corners now. He was limited this week. So
my guess is Adebo probably plays. He played last week. It was Adebo and Roby who started.
Yeah, but that was his worst game too.
Yeah.
I mean, and to your point, like, it's not like covering Jamar Chase is easy, but it doesn't get any easier if it's DeAndre Hopkins, right? So yeah, it'll be interesting, man. This is a game where, if you asked, you did ask me last Tuesday, and my response was, "Oh, they're about to get on a 2-game winning streak." And now my response is literally like,
I hope.
I have no idea what to expect. I could have never guessed that they played like they did in Seattle if you would have given me 100 guesses.
Right.
So,
it made no sense at all. It was I don't know what it was, but it was a train wreck.
It was ugly.
It was so bad.
So, and the way so here's the thing. So Jess and I are going to predict a win probably, and we're both probably going to predict something crazy like 20-17 or something like that.
I think I did 23-20. I think it might have been in my
So I mean,
in my
right,
preview,
like a low scoring 3-point game, because it's reasonable, and that's what we've seen. And the reality is, nothing makes any freaking sense this season at all. And so, we can again hope that this is better. The over/under is 44.5. You have it going under.
Correct.
The Cardinals are down, so they open as 2.5-point favorites.
There's 1.5 now, I think.
It's back up to 2.
Oh, is it?
So it's really a coin flip. And I think that's a combination. I think that's a combination of multiple things. First off, obviously the Cardinals play, the Saints' health, but I think also Thursday night games have been literally dog water to watch, and so I think
Kevin White is on their roster, or was on their roster.
I know. I just saw that too. So I honestly don't know what to expect. But what I do,
I expect an ugly game.
I
expect it to be ugly and gross, and as long as the Cardinals win, please. But if there's one thing I'm expecting something special from DeAndre Hopkins somehow.
Well, and that's what I'm hoping for, is that they come in and he makes some plays, and from there you go to the fact that, okay, this team has got, maybe their best player back, and now all of a sudden you're moving up. And so I'm going to guess a win. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to say it's not going to be crazy blowout, but it's going to be like 28 to 17 Cardinals win.
And I'm going to stick with the grinded out 23-20. Is it going to come down to a Rodrigo Blanket? Oh, we didn't even talk about the stupid kickers. They have they're Rodrigo Blankenship for the win, or will it be just holding on defensively at the end? I'm not decided yet.
I don't even want to know. I don't even want to guess that.
It's just
kickers matter.
Come on, you don't care about the kickers until you don't have one, and then it completely changes things. Because it was very clear that Kliff did not trust Amendola in those scenarios after he didn't win he was totally cool with him kicking the game-tying field goal against Philly, but then he was like, "Nah, bro, no more, no more kicking."
Right, and for all of you that were ready to move on from Matt Prater, hey, this is what you get.
That's right. All right, with that, we will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. We will be back again next week, although you will have had nearly a week. You'll have several days to stew over either what the Cardinals do or don't do, and hopefully they win and don't get embarrassed, and then there's a coaching change and stuff like that. That would just be messy. But hopefully we're talking next week about a Cardinals win, getting ready for a tough game on the road against the Vikings. So hopefully they're 3-4. And things are looking good. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening again. We'll be back again next week on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up Sea Red.